And I'm taken back in time to 1974. This committee exists because of the bill that was passed in 1974. And that bill, which was titled the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act, passed with 100% of the senators, every single senator, both sides of the aisle. And the deal was, for reducing the deficit, only for reducing the deficit, we will create a filibuster-free pathway. Now, you might recall that there was intense supporters of the filibuster, and yet every single one of them said, for one purpose, decreasing the deficit, we will have a filibuster-free pathway. And that held for 20 years. In 1996, you have the Gingrich Revolution, and we had essentially a series of bills. One of them was a line-item veto bill, and that was struck down by the Supreme Court. We also had a debate over a balanced budget amendment, and that fell one vote short here in the Senate from passing and failed. And then at that point, the Senate pivoted, the Senate leadership pivoted at that point and said, let's do a massive revenue reduction, a tax cut, a massive tax cut. Well, Democrats said no, and so the Republicans in this body said, you know what, let's use that filibuster-free pathway from 1974. And they proceeded to ask Robert Dove, the parliamentarian, for a ruling that instead of using that filibuster-free pathway for deficit reduction, they could use it for a tax cut that would increase the deficit. And they got the ruling they wanted. Robert Dove was previously an employee of Robert Dole, and he conceded, we will change this purpose. It was challenged, and there was a vote on the floor, and the vote was sustained by the majority. The ruling was sustained by the majority. And now we had, after 22 years, we blew up this bipartisan strategy of only using this for deficit reduction. That opened the door to what we did last year with the Inflation Reduction Act, in which Democrats said, well, it's going to be used for the Republican priorities to increase the deficit. Hell, we'll use it for our priorities to increase the deficit, our particular things that we would like to see accomplished that are important to America. I just want to give this history because we quickly lose track of that this has been a struggle that we have been engaged in for 50 years. And there was a pretty significant legislation in 1974 saying deficit reduction. We don't agree on how to do it, but it's so important we will create this sacred, protected, filibuster-free highway. And then it got blown up in 1996. And here we are kind of having the same question on how do we reclaim that. The former chair of this committee from North Dakota, he proceeded to change the rule back to saying it could only be used for deficit reduction. Kent Conrad rule. And immediately, as soon as the Democrats were out of power here, Republicans changed it back. And so there's a lot of posturing over who's right and who's wrong. The fact is we have failed as a Senate to wrestle with this, and we blew up the one tool we'd come together universally to support. I don't know how to put this back together, because even if we were to recreate the 74 bill, that 74 consensus, what we now know is that under political pressure, one party or the other, and it could be the blue side or the red side, is going to get a ruling from a parliamentarian and blow it up and use it exactly the opposite way that it was intended as a moment of political convenience. So I think the right way to deal with this is that we wrestle with spending bills, and those require bipartisan cooperation because they're subject to 60 votes unless we're doing it through reconciliation. We wrestle with the revenue side. If those things, that's what produces a deficit, the difference between revenue and spending.